Hey there, friends. My name is David Lightbringer, and I owe my entire career to George R.R. Martin. So let me tell you why I think he is the greatest writer of our time, and why A Song of Ice and Fire is probably the greatest story that any of us will ever read, finished or not. It's been 14 years. 14 years since we've had A Dance with Dragons, since we've had a new book in the Song of Ice and Fire series proper. But guess what? I've got good news for you, because you may have only read half of the story. But Dave, you say, how can I read the rest of the story when George hasn't written it yet? Well, that's a good point, but what I'm talking about is the story within the story. The secret story hidden right in plain sight. And if you haven't tuned into that before, that's where the good news is. Because what I'm saying is that there may actually be a ton of stuff left for you to discover in these books. Whole extra dimensions that take a scene like Dany's hatching of the dragons from amazing and powerful and moving to absolutely mind-boggling. So much so that it really does at times feel like you found a secret A Song of Ice and Fire story that you didn't know about. I actually get this feeling all the time when I read A Song of Ice and Fire, still to this day. Hero with 1,000 Voices was just on my channel last week, blowing my mind and all of our minds with some new stuff he found in the Mountain and the Viper duel. So yeah, I still get that feeling all the time when I read A Song of Ice and Fire, so it's always new to me, and I want you to have that feeling too. So that's what I'd like to accomplish with you today. By the end of this video, I'm hoping that you can look back on one of the very best Hall of Fame scenes in all of A Song of Ice and Fire, Dany's hatching of the 3 dragon's eggs, and think to yourself, wow, there's so much more going on there than I ever knew. That may sound like a tall order, but I'm confident I can deliver. And I'm going to do a lot more videos about the best scenes in A Song of Ice and Fire like this one. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel, because this stuff is a lot of fun. And once you tune into the way that George is writing the story on many different levels, you really can go back and read through the whole series and discover this entire landscape of cool stuff that was always just waiting there to be discovered, right below the surface of the main story. One of the primary ways that George does this is by creating his own little legends and folk tales and heroes. Stories like Bran the Builder, Lan the Clever, Azor Ahai, Night's King, or everyone's favorite, Galadon of Morn. And then George skillfully creates story parallels between these legendary figures and the plots and symbols of the characters in the main story, using things like the meanings of their name and nicknames, their sigils and outfits, and the things they eat. And in doing so, he creates a sort of extra dimension of shape and color that all the best scenes can then expand into, with the main characters taking on the divine roles and identities of their mythical heroes, and then carrying out ritualistic-like actions whose ramifications reach across space and time. And that is what Martin is really doing with A Song of Ice and Fire. And yes, it is truly god-tier writing shit. Now, as cool as that is, you do not need a literature degree to understand any of this. I certainly don't have one. I didn't even go to college. Because symbolism is actually intuitive by nature. It's more intuitive than language even. And the way that George writes all this is pretty intuitive, and in fact easy to follow once you catch on to how it works. I do think that Martin intends for everyone to enjoy the story this way. And that's why I say, good news. If you love A Song of Ice and Fire and you wish there was more story to read, well, let me try to convince you that there is. And if you're already hip to this, if you've heard me or someone else talk about this stuff before, then hopefully this video will impress you as my best version and best presentation of this aspect of George Martin's writing, which we all find so very fascinating. And I might have 1 or 2 tricks up my sleeves that I'm not wearing. So once again, I am David Lightbringer. Thank you very much for clicking on this video, which does double as my case for why George Martin is the greatest writer of our time. Let's open with the first scene that really blew my mind open to all this stuff, which is Dany's hatching of the dragon's eggs at the climax of A Game of Thrones. It's first and foremost an incredible scene because of its miraculous nature, and because it is so clearly born of Dany's desperate need, intuition, and iron determination. And it's also really cool because of the way it works with the prologue of A Game of Thrones, where Waymar meets the others, to form these sort of magical bookends on a story in A Game of Thrones, which is mostly driven by politics and character relationships. Of course, the hatching of the dragon scene is also awesome because it's Dany fulfilling the prophecy of Azor Ahai's return on instinct, without ever having heard the prophecy or really anything about how to hatch 200-year-old petrified dragon's eggs. They're obviously not all the way petrified, but they're said to have turned to stone, so it's definitely a miracle. And what's interesting is that, like Dany, we haven't heard the Azor Ahai prophecy either when she hatches the dragon's eggs, because that's not given to us until A Clash of Kings. That's a clever little bit of writing by George, giving us the fulfillment before the actual prophecy, but once we do have the prophecy, it's pretty easy to look back on Dany's dragon hatching scene and find a clear match. Take a look up in the sky, there's the bleeding star. Down on the ground, dragons are waking from stone. The long night hasn't fallen yet, but it does seem like it's on the way, and the dragons will probably need a few years to grow before they're ready to fight the others. So this is all looking on track. So far, we're driving straight down the middle of the road of prophecy fulfillment. This really isn't cryptic at all. It's basically very straightforward. That's why characters from Benero, the High Priest of Valor and Volantis, whom we'll hear from at the end of the video, to Archmaester Marwyn the Mage, and even Archmaester Aemon at the Wall, pretty much instantly recognize Dany as being Azor Ahai Reborn as soon as they hear about her having hatched the dragons. Now, dropping down one level further into the story, we find that Daenerys is also mimicking the original legend of Azor Ahai and Nissa in the Forging of Lightbringer. So, just hours before Dany hatched the dragons, she, as you remember, made the difficult choice to snuff out the vegetative comatose life of Khal Drogo with a pillow, with the scene of the dragons hatching coming at Drogo's subsequent funeral pyre. Now, it's strongly implied that the deaths of Drogo, Mirri Maz Duur, who was tied to the pyre, and Dany's baby Rhaego, who died the night before, or maybe thousands of years ago in the womb, or whatever, those three deaths are implied and generally understood to have paid for the lives of the three dragons. And so, like the original Azor Ahai, Dany has made a great sacrifice, including that of her love, to forge a magical talisman. Drogo and Mirri Maz Duur, Dany killed herself, just as Azor Ahai killed Nissa, while Rhaego is a bit more complicated. So instead of creating a burning sword with these sacrifices, Dany, of course, creates the dragons. But the dragons are compared to a burning sword many times, in many different ways in the books, with the most famous one being the time when Zarozo and Daxos flat out describes the dragons as a flaming sword held over the world. George is evoking the concept of the sword of Damocles there, and there's a lot more dragon flaming sword stuff sprinkled throughout the books, with the main point being that dragons are a weapon that Azor Ahai Reborn can use to fight the others, just like the burning sword Lightbringer of the original Azor Ahai legend. So that's not too hard to figure out. Azor Ahai Reborn's job is to fight the others. Dragons and flaming swords are both good weapons for doing that. So then, just as there are 3 attempts to forge Lightbringer, there are 3 dragon's eggs, which hatch with the progressively more explosive hatchings leading up to Drogon, Dany's biggest dragon. The death cry of agony and ecstasy let out by Nissa as Lightbringer's magical flames consumed her heart is found in the ululating voice of Mirri Maz Duur, whose death dirge transforms into an anguished cry of pure agony, actually, as the flames of the pyre consume her. So that's pretty cool, right? I mean, the Mirri Maz Duur thing is a little gnarly, and also ethically complicated. But the parallelism, excellent. So, not only is Dany fulfilling the prophecy of Azor Ahai's return to wake dragons from stone beneath a bleeding star, she's also reenacting the story of the original forging of Lightbringer. And yet, there is still more. More myth reenactment, because in the 3rd chapter of A Game of Thrones, Dany is told about a legend from Qarth, or at least it's from a trader from Qarth. And this is a legend about the origin of dragons. It does make sense that Dany might also reenact a legend about the origin of dragons when she is re-origining dragons into the world, and indeed, she does. A trader from Qarth once told me that dragons come from the moon, blonde Doria said as she warmed a towel over the fire. Silvery wet hair tumbled across her eyes as Dany turned her head, curious. The moon? He told me the moon was an egg, Khaleesi, the Lyseni girl said. Once there were 2 moons in the sky, but one wandered too close to the sun and cracked from the heat. 1,000 dragons poured forth and drank the fire of the sun. That is why dragons breathe flame. One day the other moon will kiss the sun too, and then it will crack, and the dragons will return. The 2 Dothraki girls giggled and laughed. You are foolish straw-head slave, Irri said. Moon is no egg, moon is God, woman wife of sun. It is known, Cheeky agreed. Hey now, a mythology BOGO. Buy one myth, get one myth. Or for the olds in the crowd, it's the Daily Double, because we did just get 2 cosmologies for the price of 1, as Irri and Jiki kindly supplied us with some Dothraki belief to, wash down the Qarthian legend. And together, and this is the important part, they combine to sketch out the scene at the hatching of the dragons. So first off, the Dothraki sun and moon husband and wife pairing is mimicked intentionally, I would think, in the nicknames that Drogo and Dany give to each other. Dany calls Drogo my sun and stars, and Drogo calls Dany moon of my life. So the Dothraki believe the sun and moon are gods, man and wife, and so Drogo and Dany, man and wife, are like the sun and the moon. Now think back to the scene at Drogo's pyre. Dany the moon is literally wandering too close to the fire of her son, Drogo. And that is exactly when the dragon's eggs crack open, just like the moon egg in the Carthian legend. So just as the dragons that are born from the moon drink the fire of the sun, and that's why dragons can breathe flame, the life fires of Drogo the sun have paid for the life of Drogon, the dragon, who now breathes fire with Drogo's name. So Drogo is Dany's son, quote unquote, but Dany's real son, Rhaego, his life also paid for a dragon, presumably the dragon Rhaegal. And so we see that George has actually doubled up on this idea of the death of the sun here. And that obviously alludes to the Long Night, which is what Azor Ahai Reborn is supposed to be reborn to deal with. So now we have Dany fulfilling the prophecy of Azor Ahai's return, while she is also acting out the legends of the origin of dragons and the origin of Lightbringer, all in one scene, where we also find allusions to the Long Night itself. The dragons do seem to be Dany's version of Lightbringer, so that all makes sense. And now that we can clearly see all of these legends that Dany is embodying, this already amazing scene gains an even more titanic stature. I hope you will agree. I mean, I sort of struggle to describe the awesomeness of all this, to be honest. Like I said, God-tier writing and secret story, and in the past I've talked about George Martin writing modern mythology, but I'm not really sure that any of those words do what we're talking about justice. It's an emotional response of awe and wonder that Martin is evoking here, which is the core of fantasy writing. So it does sort of defy a compact description. Do let me know in the comments how this sort of storytelling makes you feel. I'm curious to see if anyone can sort of nail this sentiment that I'm talking about. All right, well, I hope that's all very impressive, and I hope I've begun to live up on the promise in the intro to this video. But there is still more with this pile of myths that sort of stacks up at the scene of the hatching of the dragons. We, the reader, might be still wondering a few things, like, what do these legends actually mean? Because how can flying, flapping, winged dragons have flown down from the moon through space to Earth? That doesn't really make sense. We might wonder what potential real events some of these legends could be describing. And specifically, we might be wondering about the destruction of a theoretical second moon. Could that have something to do with the cause of the long night and the wonky seasons? Seems like it might. Well, this Carthian moon dragon myth and the forging of Lightbringer myth are both what I would call classic mythical astronomy, meaning that they are mythical stories created to describe and explain celestial events, frequently cataclysmic celestial events. So the Carthian legend claims that there were once two moons, one of which wandered too close to the sun or apparently suffered some sort of great calamity because it cracked open and gave birth to what can only be stylized descriptions of moon meteors, pieces of broken moon falling down through the atmosphere and catching fire. This sort of super meteor shower could be described from a mythical perspective as a swarm of fiery dragons flying down to the earth and breathing fire. Or they could be described as a storm of fiery swords, or as the stars bleeding, which is from the Azor Ahai prophecy. These moon meteor dragons, if you will, can be said to have woken from stone because they came from the cracked open moon. They are pieces of the cracked open moon. They are its children. And the moon in the Carthian legend was like a stone egg, just like Dany's dragon's eggs are stone eggs. So it's a perfect parallel. Moon dragons, earth dragons, both hatched from stone eggs. But the dragons up in the sky, again, not the winged dragons, those are meteor dragons. Now, Azor Ahai Reborn, of course, is the one who is supposed to wake dragons from stone, quote unquote. And wouldn't you know it, the original Azor Ahai woke dragons from stone because he cracked the moon open when he forged Lightbringer in the heart of Nissa Nissa. So let's step back here, just in case all that symbolism has got you spinning a little bit, and let's see if we can figure out what the real events are behind these legends. So the first thing we notice is that we've got two myths which both describe the cracking of a moon. In one myth, it's a formerly existent second moon, and in the other myth, it's just the moon. But two different legends from two different parts of the world describing the same event means that it probably happened. At least it's the most likely event in all of this stuff to be a real thing that happened, quote unquote. And indeed, regional or especially global cataclysms are just the thing that humans invent grandiose mythology to describe and explain. So think about what we've got here now. If something really did happen to the moon or the second moon thousands of years in the past, something that was catastrophic enough to result in pieces of cracked off moon falling down through the Earth's atmosphere as giant flaming meteorites. Well, wouldn't that be a good mechanism for causing a long night, i.e. an impact winter that amounts to a partial or near total darkening of the sun for years at a time? And isn't the Azor Ahai legend supposed to have taken place during the long night? Perhaps the moon cracking event, remembered in that legend, actually happened at the beginning of the long night and was the cause of the long night instead of happening during the long night. Because again, it's kind of a smoking gun if we're looking for a mechanism to blot out the sun. Because after all, there's only three things that can cause a global winter scenario: an impact winter from a comet or meteor, a nuclear winter, or a volcanic winter. Nuclear weapons, and thus nuclear winters, don't exist in this story so far as we know, so that's not a likely suspect. And the doom of Valyria was as big a volcanic explosion as George Martin can imagine, and he didn't picture it creating a long night. But he put this moon cracking thing in two different legends from the Far East, which means that must have been the side of the globe facing the moon when it got obliterated. So I think Martin wants us to think that this actually happened. And then he mimicked the moon obliteration in Dany's Hatching of the Dragons in several different ways. So it must be important. It must be a key part of the chain of events. And remember, Dany's son, Drogo, and her actual son, Rhaego, both died to pay for the waking of the dragons. So perhaps the original son died, meaning was shut out by clouds of smoke, ash, and debris, when those moon meteor dragons awoke from the cracked moon egg. That is a coherent scenario. I mean, we've got no idea if blood magic sword forging rituals can actually affect anything in the sky. It's possible in a fantasy story, but the idea that a celestial cataclysm involving the moon led to an apocalyptic meteor shower and impact winter is something we can wrap our brains around. And I do want to specify that I'm talking about a magical version of a scientific idea. I think that's how Martin creates his magic. Because he has said that the cause of the messed up seasons is a magical one and not something you can figure out with two suns or some sort of astrophysics answer. So what I'm saying is that Martin took the basic idea of moon meteors causing an impact winter and sprinkled magic over it. So, for example, that oily black stone we find everywhere, those could be remnants of moon meteor for sure. And if this planet really did used to have two moons, well, that definitely could be a cause of the messed up seasons. Again, thinking in magical terms, what if these were moons of ice and fire in A Song of Ice and Fire? Perhaps originally the moons governed the seasons of ice and fire, and damaging or destroying one of them screwed up the balance. And although we don't have time to get into this today, one of the reasons I think this is because we have a lot of moon characters in the story who are clearly associated with either ice or fire. So perhaps the original moons were ice and fire, and that's why the seasons are all messed up, because the second moon got obliterated. So we're almost done, but to add an even further dimension to Dany's scene, let's take a look at the exact wording of the version of the Azor Ahai reborn prophecy that Melisandre gives while she's conducting her fake Lightbringer ritual on Dragonstone with Stannis, who is definitely not Azor Ahai reborn. Take a look at this language, which comes from ancient books of Ashai, by the way. It is written that there will come a day after a long summer when the stars bleed and the cold breath of darkness falls heavy on the world. So first, the stars will bleed, and then the cold breath of darkness will fall heavy on the world. That sounds like the theory we just laid out. A bunch of bleeding stars are causing a long night. That's when we need Azor Ahai to be reborn. And sure enough, we have Daenerys fulfilling the prophecy. And also Jon hanging around to fulfill the prophecy when he's reborn. Check out my Jon Azor Ahai video, and also my Dany Azor Ahai video. And I think the third head of the dragon is going to be Euron. Check out these very old Euron videos that I need to update, but which are still watchable, hopefully. Point is, this ancient Ashai prophecy clearly calls for a meteor shower for the stars to bleed right when a new long night is supposed to fall. And this would simply parallel what the old legends seem to be describing, a moon cracking open and raining down meteors on the earth at the time of the long night. So I really do want to try to keep this video short. It's always a problem for me. Check out my Lightbringer series for the longer version of this. So I will only briefly mention that there are other legends of falling stars tied to the long night, such as the legend of the Bloodstone Emperor from far eastern Essos. He ruled something called the Great Empire of the Dawn right before the long night, and just as Azor Ahai is remembered as cracking open the moon, which we now think is the cause of the long night, the Bloodstone Emperor too was specifically blamed for causing the long night, and also by murdering a special woman, just like Azor Ahai murdered Nissa to crack open the moon. In this case, it was Bloodstone Emperor murdering his sister, the Amethyst Empress, who was the rightful ruler of the Great Empire of the Dawn, and whom he usurped. So I don't know, maybe this is the same blood magic ritual being described in both of these legends. But the point is, the Bloodstone Emperor is remembered as worshipping a black stone that fell from the sky during the long night. And then we have Dawn, of course, which is probably Lightbringer, or at least connected to that myth. And Dawn is made from the heart of a fallen star. It does appear to be a meteor sword, and of course, meteorites are actually the first place ancient man made iron weapons and implements from, whether that be the Egyptians and the meteorite knife found in King Tut's tomb, or the ancient Dorset culture of North America who mined the Anghito or Cape York meteorite for knives and other iron implements for hundreds of years. That's some really interesting history, by the way. They made a little encampment on the coast of Greenland after they found the meteorite, and then they would come visit and carve chunks off of it and make knives and iron implements off of the meteor. So yes, a meteorite is a great explanation for a mysteriously advanced iron sword that existed thousands of years too early. And thanks to everyone who watched my recent Dawn and Lightbringer video, which has more information on that topic. Anyway, real-world meteor history aside, Dawn does appear to be a meteor sword, perhaps made out of one of those chunks of broken moon that fell to Earth. I don't know, IDK, perhaps. Although I would also guess that the heart of a fallen star that Dawn was forged from might also be an allusion to the burned heart of Nissa from which Azor Ahai pulled Lightbringer. And if we go back to the hatching of the dragons scene, we find that Dany pulled her Lightbringer dragons from Drogo's heart, because she placed the eggs in between his limbs around his body, with one of them being by his heart. And yes, that makes Drogo Nissa in this scene. So at this point, the evidence is really starting to pile up. We have these two ancient legends about moons cracking, and we've got the Bloodstone Emperor mythology and the Dawn mythology, which both talk about falling stars tied to the long night. Now, there are other signs of falling stars in ancient legends, which we don't have time to get into, but Hugor of the Hill, the Grey King, Galadon of Morn, everyone's favorite. But I think the point is made for now. However, just in case people aren't paying close attention to these ancient legends, George also has Benero, freaking High Priest of Valordum, act out my entire moon meteor long night theory as if it were a game of A Song of Ice and Fire charades in A Dance with Dragons. And I shit you not, that's really what he does. So this scene begins with Ser Jorah, who has recently kidnapped Tyrion, talking to Tyrion as they blend into the crowd at the Red Temple in Volantis. He pointed at the steps where a line of men in ornate armor and orange cloaks stood before the temple's doors, clasping spears with points like writhing flames. The Fiery Hand, the Lord of Light's sacred soldiers, defenders of the temple. Fire Knights, and how many fingers does this hand have, pray? 1,000, never more and never less. A new flame is kindled for everyone that cutters out. Benero jabbed a finger at the moon, made a fist, spread his hands wide. When his voice rose in a crescendo, flames leapt from his fingers with a sudden whoosh and made the crowd gasp. The priest could trace fiery letters in the air as well, Valyrian glyphs. Tyrion recognized perhaps 2 in 10. One was doom, the other darkness. And there you have it. Pretty much. So right after we're told that 1,000 of these fiery soldiers of Valor make up something called the Fiery Hand, the High Priest of Valor uses his fiery hand to pantomime out the moon disaster theory. He points at the moon to let you know what he's talking about, then he makes a fist to symbolize the moon, and then he explodes, quote-unquote, his moon hand in a fiery whoosh that makes the crowd gasp. And he further scares them by painting fiery glyphs, two of which are doom and darkness. So yes, I think Bonero is literally giving the crowd a prophecy, a winds of winter prediction, if you will, of the moon exploding and causing doom and darkness on the entire world. And I suppose he could be talking about the original moon disaster, but judging by the crowd's reaction, it seems more like a prophecy of something that's about to happen. And to be clear, it's not just a moon disaster Bonero is describing, but a meteor shower, because those 1,000 soldiers of the fiery hand, dressed in fiery clothing and holding spears with metal spear points like writhing flames, well, they seem like pretty obvious symbols of fiery meteors, and they're meant to complement the flames shooting out of the fingers of Bonero's fiery hand, which symbolized the moon. Even the fact that there are 1,000 fiery fingers echoes the thousand dragons that poured forth from the moon in the Carthene legend. Now, do you know what other passage in A Song of Ice and Fire seems to make a winds of winter prediction about an apocalyptic moon meteor shower? That's right, it's the Carthene moon dragon legend. That's right, from book 1, because the end of it promises that one day the other moon will kiss the sun too, and then it will crack, and the dragons will return. That is specifically a prophecy of more moon meteor dragons. And how not? How not? If Martin went to all these lengths to make this secret story within a story about the ancient Long Night disaster being the result of moon meteor dragons, then he probably isn't going to invent an entirely different way to cause a long night for the climax of the current story. Part of the point of hiding this whole thing about the first long night inside of the symbolism is because it's going to predict the end of the story, and he doesn't want to give that away easily. So yeah, it's going to be more moon meteors. George has planned this out from the beginning. As you can see, a lot of this is in book 1. And it's also pretty easy to see that this Carthene legend isn't talking about the disappearance and return of the Targaryen dragons, because it was written thousands of years ago. This legend is about the original moon meteor dragons and the ones which are coming at the end of the Winds of Winter. And this, of course, would be the very same mega meteor shower that Melisandre says the ancient scrolls of Ashai prophesy to happen. Ashai, in turn, is where Azor Ahai is from, and where one of the legends of the moon cracking is from. And Bonero, in turn, is already prophesying that Azor Ahai has been reborn in the form of Daenerys. Ergo, the Red Temple is on top of all this shit. And now you are too. And now you can see just how much prophecy and legend is coming together, the scene of the dragons hatching. And so, like Maximus Decimus Meridius, I ask you, are you not entertained? Hasn't this already awesome scene now become just completely bonkers, with symbolic parallels that reach thousands of years into the past and halfway around the world to Ashai, but also into the future to foreshadow the doom of mankind and also the solution to the problem, which is the dragons. George R.R. Martin, greatest author of our generation, did most of this in book 1 and a little bit in book 2. And then he essentially created subsequent legends and scenes to further echo the original ideas and symbols. And in this way, some of these deep symbolic concepts anchored in these ancient legends actually serve as a backbone and a structure for the story. All right, so now that you've got all that, do try going back and rereading this entire Daenerys dragon hatching chapter. And with all the symbolism in mind, see if you can't spot some other stuff that lines up with these ideas. See if there isn't more stuff in that chapter that's exploding with symbolism, such as Drogo's solar face being suffocated by Dany's pillow, just as the real sun was suffocated by the smoke, ash, and debris of the moon explosion. And yes, Joffrey's solar face choking and turning purple at the purple wedding is another version of this idea. So cheers, friends. Thanks for watching. And if you enjoyed this, do subscribe to the channel because I'll have a lot more videos like this. And there's quite the back catalog to check out, again, if you like this sort of thing. Most of all, please do share this video with anyone else that you know that likes A Song of Ice and Fire, because George put a lot of work into writing this story and into writing this aspect of the story. And I think it's simply doing the work justice to bring everyone into the party, into the fun, so they can appreciate it too. And that's really what my channel is all about. So thanks very much for watching. Do leave a comment, let me know what you think about all this, and I'll see you every Starry Wisdom Sunday with a fresh Starry Wisdom Sunday live stream, many of which are chapter rereads where we get into this sort of nitty-gritty text in more detail. So yeah, I'll see you on Sunday. I've been David Lightbringer. Thanks a lot. Cheers.